It was Easter Sunday. Heidi Allen was working alone. She opened the store before sunrise, like she always did. Her last sale was recorded at 7:42 in the morning. Just minutes later, the store was empty. No goodbye. No struggle caught on tape. No confirmed sighting of her walking away. Just an open store, a routine morning, and an 18-year-old cashier who was suddenly gone. And that is what makes Heidi Allen's case feel so wrong. Because this wasn't a disappearance that happened over hours. It happened in the middle of a shift, in a place where someone should have seen something. And yet, all these years later, no one can fully explain what happened in those final minutes.
Heidi Allen was only 18 years old. She worked at the D&W convenience store in New Haven, New York. It was the kind of place where the morning routine mattered. Open early, turn on the lights, start the register, serve the first customers of the day. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. And that ordinary rhythm is exactly what makes this case so unsettling. Because when someone disappears in the middle of an ordinary routine, the smallest break in that routine starts to feel enormous. On Easter Sunday, April 3, 1994, Heidi opened the store at around 5:45 a.m. According to the official case summary, everything seemed normal for roughly the next 2 hours. No obvious alarm, no clear sign that anything had already gone wrong. That matters, because it tells you this wasn't a disappearance that began with chaos. It began with normality, and normality is much harder to defend yourself against. She was working alone. That detail changes everything. A person alone in a small roadside store before full daylight doesn't just feel isolated. They are isolated. There are fewer witnesses, fewer interruptions, fewer people who can say with certainty, "I saw exactly what happened." And in cases like this, that gap becomes dangerous, because the fewer eyes there are on a moment, the easier it is for that moment to disappear with the person inside it. At 7:42 a.m., Heidi rang up her final transaction. That is one of the coldest details in the whole case. A timestamp, a receipt, a normal act, the kind of thing that should anchor a timeline. And for a second, it feels helpful, because once you have a final transaction, you feel close. You feel like you can narrow the window. You feel like the answer has to be nearby. But in Heidi Allen's case, that timestamp does the opposite. It doesn't solve the mystery, it only sharpens it. Because by around 7:55 a.m., the store was reported vacant. Not closed, not locked up for the day, vacant. That word matters, because it suggests interruption. Not a planned exit, not a clean ending to a shift, an absence in the middle of work. And when a place that should have had someone behind the counter suddenly doesn't, the silence starts to feel louder than anything else. That tiny stretch of time, from the last recorded sale to the moment the store was found empty, is the entire heart of this case. Just a few minutes, that's all. A few minutes between a normal transaction and a disappearance that has never been fully explained. And that is what makes the case so hard to shake. Because in most disappearances, the timeline feels wide. There are gaps, hours you can't account for, places where things could have changed. But here, the timeline is brutally tight. A customer is served, the store is functioning. Then, only minutes later, Heidi Allen is gone. That kind of narrow window should make a case easier to solve. Instead, in cases like this, It makes every missing detail feel even more unbearable. Because if the answer isn't in those minutes, where is it? The official investigation has long treated Heidi's disappearance as a forcible abduction, and even that wording tells you something. Not that every detail is known, but that investigators believed she did not simply walk away from her life on her own. That idea that something happened to her while she was still on the job, still in a normal morning, still in full view of a public place, is what gives this case its weight. It wasn't deep in the woods. It wasn't on a long, isolated road trip. It was at a store, during business hours, in a place where life was already moving. And if someone can vanish there, in a space that ordinary, the case stops feeling distant. It starts feeling uncomfortably possible. That's why Heidi Allen's disappearance has never really settled into the background. Not because there were no details, because there were just enough details to make the lack of an answer feel even worse. The opening time, the shift, the final sale, the empty store. Each one should help. Each one should narrow the truth. But together they only create a sharper outline around the same terrible fact. Heidi Allen was there. Then she wasn't. And even after decades, that transition still feels too fast, too clean, and too incomplete to accept as normal. The case pulled in the community quickly. Searches happened. Leads were followed. The years brought court cases, arguments, theories, and public attention. But even with all of that, Heidi herself was never found. And that's important for your ending, because it means the emotional center of the case never moved. It never became about a solved mystery. It stayed what it was from the start. A girl working alone on Easter morning who seemed to vanish in the space between one customer and the next. There is something especially haunting about that kind of disappearance. Not because it is dramatic, because it isn't. It's simple. A register, a counter, a small store, a final sale, and then an absence so complete that it turned a normal morning into a permanent question. That simplicity is what makes it so powerful, because every time you strip the case down to its core, it still sounds impossible. Heidi Allen opened the store. Heidi Allen served customers. Heidi Allen's last transaction was recorded. And then, in just a few minutes, Heidi Allen was gone. What makes Heidi Allen's disappearance so disturbing isn't only that she was young, or that she was alone, or even that it happened on Easter Sunday. It's that the timeline feels like it should have been enough. There was a store. There was a shift. There was a final transaction. There were only minutes in between. And still, the truth never fully came into focus. That is what makes the case feel wrong. Not just tragic, wrong. Because it feels like the answer should still be sitting somewhere inside that ordinary morning. Behind the counter, inside the store, between 7:42 and 7:55. And yet, all these years later, it isn't. Heidi Allen was at work. Then the store was empty. And that tiny, ordinary gap in time became one of the most haunting disappearances tied to Easter Sunday.